All right, thank you everyone for joining me on this live stream on the GeoFocus channel. So we're going to get started right away. In recent weeks, we talked about this topic right here, the 10 most populous Muslim countries. The thumbnail says top 10 Muslim countries. Of course, it's not the top 10 best. It's the top 10 most populous Muslim countries. Today, we're talking about something related, but not exactly the same, because we're not limiting the topic to Muslim countries. It's all countries. We're going to focus on the top 10 most populous countries around the world, both now and at the end of the century, 78 years from now, in the year 2100. We're going to compare those two lists and see some trends in population growth and different trends in different parts of the world. You might be asking yourself, how the heck do we know what the population will be in the year 2100? Of course, we don't know for sure. Different organizations have their own projections and predictions, so that's what we use. We don't really have any concrete knowledge of what the population of different countries will be. We just have statistics based on current trends. But we're going to use data from the United Nations. Other international organizations have their own projections, and some of them disagree with the UN, sometimes strongly, but that's fine. We're just going to use the UN's data, and UN is a fairly reliable source, I would guess. Let's start by looking at the top 10 most populous countries right now. Number 1 is China, probably no surprise there, with 1.415 billion. Number 2 is India, with almost the same number of people, but slightly fewer. The USA is number 3. Indonesia is number 4. Pakistan is number 5. Nigeria is number 6. Brazil is number 7. Bangladesh is number 8. Russia is number 9. And Mexico is number 10. So a few things we can notice from this list. First, the dominance of China and India. They have a much bigger population than any of the other countries on the list. And actually, if we put them together, they comprise 35% or more of the world's population. And also, if you total up the population of number 3 to number 10, they don't have as many people as just number 1 and number 2, China and India. So that shows you just how dominant those two countries are in terms of population. They have huge populations. Another thing we can notice is the presence of Asia. Not dominance, but heavy presence of Asia on this list. 5 of the 10 countries are in Asia. So aside from China and India, there's Indonesia, there's Pakistan, there's Bangladesh. So that shows you just in terms of the population balance of the world, right now it's heavily weighted towards Asia. So keep that in mind. That might change slightly in the future when we look at the second list. I didn't include Russia as an Asian country, by the way, even though it's transcontinental and it's located in both Asia and Europe. Most of the population of Russia is located in the European part, 110 million people out of 145 million people. So we could include the Asian section, the Asian portion of Russia, but it's not a separate country, so I didn't include it as part of Asia. Okay, some other things we can notice. North America has 2 countries on the list, the USA and Mexico. Africa has 1 country. Take note of that because that might change on the second list. And South America has 1 country, Brazil. Okay, so let's think about the future. The year 2100, 78 years from now, at the time of this live stream. If you're watching it on playback several years from now, maybe it will be different. Okay, so let's look at the 2 lists side by side and we'll notice some differences. The first thing you might notice is that India and China are still number 1 and 2, but their positions have reversed. India will be number 1, it's projected to be number 1, and China is projected to be number 2 with 1.07 billion. I noticed a little mistake here. Well, I can't point because it's cut off. China says it's moved down 2 spaces. That should be it's moved down 1 space. So all of those arrows show how many spaces on the list the country has moved up or down. China's should be 1, not 2. But anyway, China has moved from 1st to 2nd, and its population will have shrunk by 400 million. That's just the decline in population. 400 million fewer people in the future. So that's probably a result of a couple of things. One of them is China's previous policy of one child per family, the one child policy. That resulted in a smaller population base for the current generation. But also some other things. Also, it's related to their economic success. So let's have a look. We're going to look at an article that I see somewhere here. Let me just find it on the screen. Okay, can you see that? Okay, so China's population is about to shrink for the first time since the Great Famine struck 60 years ago. Here's what that means for the world. Okay, we're going to skip most of this and just look down at the part that shows the reasons for the decline. This is on the World Economic Forum's website. Let me scroll down to the highlighted part here. Theories differ about why Chinese women remain reluctant to have children in the face of state incentives. So let me pause for a second. They used to have the one-child policy. Now they've ended it, and they're encouraging women to have more children again, but they still aren't. So why are they still having few children? One reason involves having become used to small families. So maybe they're used to the lifestyle that was created by the one-child policy. Like if most families only had one child, there's a certain number of people living in each apartment, right? Or in each home. So if they're suddenly telling you, have more children, you can't really imagine where all those people will fit into your apartment, right? Like people are used to a certain kind of lifestyle. Maybe that would prevent them from having bigger families. They're just not used to it anymore. Another reason involves the rising cost of living. Another involves increasing marriage age, which delay births and dampens the desire to have children. So those things are results of economic prosperity. When countries become more prosperous, people tend to delay marriage and have fewer children in order to keep costs down and in order to maximize their opportunities, because they have more career opportunities, more chances to make a good living. If you're poor and you have children, then you're still just poor. But if you have a good career and a good income and you give that up to have children, you lose a lot more. I guess that's part of the psychological reason behind it. That's just my additional speculation. Okay, and down below in the blue, in addition, China has fewer women of childbearing age than might be expected. Limited to having only one child since 1980, many couples opted for a boy. Lifting the sex at birth ratio from 106 boys for every 100 girls, the ratio in most of the rest of the world, to 120, and in some provinces 130. Wow. Opted for a boy. How do you do that? What does that mean? Well, that means people had ultrasounds and discovered the gender of their baby. I should say the sex of their baby, physical sex. And if it was not a boy, they would abort. As kind of strange as that sounds, or sad as that sounds, that's kind of what happened. So people thought, okay, we can only have one child. We value boys more, so let's get rid of the unborn females. I don't like that, but that's kind of what happened. So based on the population, you would expect that a certain number of women would be giving birth, but there are fewer women as a proportion of the population. So fewer women are giving birth for that number of people in the population. Okay, I feel like I've gotten a little off track here, but let's get back to one more projection. Yeah, there are some other projections. Some of them are even like worse, not worse, but they project an even greater decline for the population of China. So we can see that here. This is on the BBC's website. The Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences team predicts an annual average decline of 1.1% after the year 2021, pushing China's population down to 587 million in the year 2100. Less than half of what it is today. Much less than half. I think it's like 40%. Like less than 40% of what it is today. Something like that. Yeah, so some organizations think there will be an even greater decline. Okay, so let's have a look at the next part here. So we're moving on from that point about China's decline in population. The next point is the difference between number 2 and number 3. Like there's a big gap between countries number 1 and 2, and country number 3 currently. But in the future, the gap will be much smaller. You can see that Nigeria is number 3, and it has 733 million people. That's more than triple its current population. So the gap between 2 and 3 will be much smaller. And if you look at all of the countries below 1 and 2, all of them have a bigger population than number 3 to 10 do now. Just in general, populations will grow. The whole world population will be higher. But some countries will decline in population, but in general, other countries will grow quite a lot. Okay, and that country, Nigeria, which will be number 3, is not the only African country on the list in the year 2100. There will be 5 African countries. Before there was only 1, but there will be 5 in the top 10. So that shows you a change in the trend, a shift in the population balance of the world towards Africa. In addition to Nigeria, there will be the Democratic Republic of Congo, which will quadruple its population from 90 million to over 360 million. Then there's Ethiopia, which will more than double its population. I guess it's like 2.5 times its population, from 120 million to 294 million. Then there's Tanzania, which will almost quintuple its population. The quintuple means multiply by 5, right? The exact number, I think, is 4.7 or 4.8 times the current population, from 60 million to 286 million. So it's the country with the greatest growth in the top 10. So Egypt is also on the list. It's a North African country, mostly in North Africa, partly in Asia. But the most growth is in sub-Saharan Africa: Nigeria, DRC, Ethiopia, Tanzania. Okay, so Tanzania is growing the most quickly out of any country in the top 10. Let's think about why for a second. So I'm going back to the articles here. Okay, so let me have a look. Among the factors that have contributed to this increase, one of the fastest in the world, is the falling mortality rate. Life expectancy in Tanzania has increased over the past decades from 50 to 58 years. So 58 years is still not a high life expectancy, but it's increased significantly. So that's actually the biggest factor in the increase in the rate of population growth. You would think it's the birth rate, but the birth rate has always been high. So the thing that's making the population balloon now is actually a longer life expectancy due to improvements in health and sanitation and that kind of thing. The second point here, in addition, Tanzanian women have continued to have many children, 5.4 per woman. So it says continued. So they've always had a high birth rate. That's not really the thing that's causing the increase in the rate of growth, but it helps maintain it, and yeah, it's one factor in the growth still. Okay, a couple other points down here. Infant mortality has halved over the last 25 years, so that's a factor in the increase in life expectancy. Early marriage. The median age at first marriage in 2010 was 18.8 years in Tanzania, compared with 20 in Kenya and 21.4 in Rwanda. So people get married young and have children when they're young. That creates a much higher birth rate. Insufficient education. Reaching secondary education considerably delays the age at first marriage and the age that you have children. So when women have educational opportunities, they tend to get married later and focus more on career and that kind of thing, and have fewer children. Another interesting point down here, the use of contraceptives has stalled. Contraceptives meaning birth control pills. It has stalled, with only 27% of women using modern contraceptives. So that could be because of a lack of education about birth control. It could be religious influence. It could be against people's religion to use birth control. Or it could be like the aid organizations in that country discourage people from using birth control because they're a religious organization or something like that. Okay, so those are all factors in Tanzania's high level of growth. There are also a couple more countries outside of the top 10, but in sub-Saharan Africa, that are growing even faster. One of them is Angola. which will more than quintuple its population. It'll multiply by more than 5, from 35 million to 188 million. And Niger will more than sextuple its population. Sextuple meaning multiply by 6, from 26 million to 165 million. So again, this shows you the huge level of growth in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, another thing we can notice on the second list, the future list, is the presence of Asia. Asia is represented by 5 countries rather than 4 as it currently is. So aside from, sorry, let me rephrase that. It's opposite. Now there are 5. In the future, there will be only 4 Asian countries on the list. Aside from India and China, there will be Pakistan and Indonesia. So again, that's showing sort of a shift in the population balance of the world from Asia towards Africa. One of those countries is Indonesia. Indonesia's population will increase, but it will move down 3 spaces on the list because it won't increase as quickly as some of the others. It's indicative of a trend of middle-income countries that actually will peak in population around 2050 or 2060 and then start to decline in population. So it's related to what I said about China, about how countries that become economically prosperous reach their population peak and then start to decline because of a decrease in birth rate. So that's going to happen with, it's projected to happen with several middle-income countries that are currently developing, and once they reach a developed state, they'll start to decline. So aside from Indonesia, that will also happen with India. India will actually have a higher population than this, and then it will come down to about where it is right now. But it will be higher in the middle of the century. And some other countries this is a factor in is Brazil, Bangladesh, and Mexico. All of them will peak in the middle of the century and then start to decline a little bit in population, and that will move them out of the top 10. So if prosperity creates a decline in birth rate and a decline in population, why is the United States still on the list? Why is it only moving down from 3 to 4? Why isn't it completely off the list like the others? Well, the USA has a high rate of immigration. I believe there are over 1 million immigrants per year. That includes people who arrive and people who upgrade their status, like from resident to citizen or that kind of thing. Russia is similar in a way. Russia has high immigration, like the US does. That might sound surprising, but the immigration to Russia is mostly from the Commonwealth of Independent States. So countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union and are near Russia, like Kazakhstan and places like that. So it has high immigration, but lower birth rate and lower life expectancy. Too much vodka, too many car crashes, things like that. Lower life expectancy in Russia. Okay, so if we think about the population growth in certain countries, especially in Africa, it begs the question, is population growth good? So it's probably good in some ways and bad in other ways, or potentially good and potentially bad in different ways. If we think about the potential benefits, one of them is that a larger population goes hand in hand with urbanization, which is a precursor for economic development. So if you have an urbanized country, you won't necessarily have economic prosperity. But without urbanization, you won't have economic prosperity. It just doesn't really happen. You need one before you have the other. If you have a larger population and urbanization, there's more economic diversity and more efficient economies of scale. So you can easily sell to more people if they're congregated in one smaller area. So that benefits those companies that are producing and selling goods. I'm not an economist, but these are just general things we can learn about. Also, more human capital. So if you have a bigger population, you'll probably have more people who stand out. Maybe you'll have more people who are highly intelligent or highly innovative who can create things or create processes that help the entire population, not just themselves. More human capital leads to more prosperity and development for everyone, potentially, right? Okay, some challenges, or possible challenges. There may not be enough opportunities for young people. So if you have a growing economy, but a population that's growing even faster than the economy, then there might not be enough opportunities for people to participate in the economy. And that can cause all sorts of other problems. For example, there'll be more people for the government to provide services to. If there's a sort of welfare state and the government provides things for the population, or if they have anti-poverty programs and try to help the population get out of poverty, if there's a bigger population of poor people, it's harder to help them. It's more expensive, so it's just probably much less feasible. And another thing, the likelihood of disorder and conflict increases. If you have a lot of young people who are hopeless and don't have opportunities, then they're probably more likely to be recruited by militant groups or criminal groups in order to find meaning or to find more opportunities. So related to that, let's look at another article for a minute. Let me see. Let me go back to a different page here. This one. Okay, this is from something called the Premium Times, which is a media outlet in Nigeria. Nigeria's Demographic Time Bomb is the title, but I just want to look at one part, which explains what I just said. According to Henrik Erdel, a review of population dynamics worldwide between years 1950 and 2000 showed that high fertility rates produce a youth bulge, meaning like a big bulge in the population, a big growth in the current generation, which in turn is a precursor to domestic armed conflict. It is therefore not surprising that the state of insecurity in Nigeria has reached an unprecedented level. And then it goes on to talk about commando-style operations and kidnappings and ransom and different criminal activities or banditry. So that's just an example of how an increase in the number of young people without opportunities can lead to unrest. Okay, so those are all projections, projections about future populations of different countries. They're not factual, they're not 100% proven, but they're predictions, and we can get a general idea of how the world is going to go in the future. So that brings us to the question of the day for you. What effects do you think these changes will have on the world? Thinking about population growth in Africa, less population growth in some other areas, a decline in population in more prosperous countries, and that sort of thing. What kind of effects do you think this will have on the world? All right, so I want to say thank you for joining me on this stream. Another thing, you can write in the comments if you have any ideas for topics that would be good in a live stream like this. Maybe not for like a regular video, but might be interesting to talk about in a live stream, or interesting stories from different countries around the world that might be interesting to touch on. Then feel free to write those and I'll have a look. Maybe they'll be in another stream in the future. But thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.